welcome to Lecture 1.2, Robot Mechanicality. For a device to be considered a robot, it must have a mechanical presence in an environment, like we discussed in the last lecture. One immediate conclusion from this is that a simulation is not a robot. This does not mean we cannot simulate robots. In fact, we must simulate a robot to design one of any value, which is part of why we spend several chapters on just that later in this text. So what does it mean that a simulation is not a robot? There are 2 points here being emphasized. 1, reality is much more complicated than can be simulated, and therefore even good robot simulations cannot account for everything. Reality is tough, kid. 2, simulations of robots are great, but they can do no mechanical work. Or, put simply, a simulation doth not a robot make. Another implication of the mechanicality of a robot is that it has space and therefore matter and form. What is the stuff, matter, of a robot? Most robots are made of the usual materials found in machines: metals, plastics, rubbers, and ceramics. And of course, silicon. The form one takes depends on its function. A robot that must change its location requires a means of locomotion. One that must manipulate objects in the world must change its own orientation relative to the world. These last two, locomotion and orientation, are more than simple examples. They divide the 2 primary types of robots: mobile robots and manipulation robots. The paradigmatic case of the former is the self-driving car. Here's a little illustration of a self-driving car. And the latter is the manufacturing robot arm. Okay, here's the robot arm. There's no reason a self-driving car can't have a robot arm. Can't be both a mobile and manipulation robot, but that's just showing off. Locomotion. Mobile robots must do something basic to animal life: move about in an environment. Moving about, or locomotion, is a fascinating topic with novelty everywhere. Something that makes it challenging is that it depends on both the robot and its environment. For instance, a robot that locomotes with wheels might not be effective at navigating the terrain of a rocky hillside, and a lake even less so. Locomotion, then, is a robot environment problem. There's a correlation. Some types of environments commonly considered are on ground, or terrestrial, underground, or fossorial, in liquid, or aqueous, in gas, or aerial, and space. Most robots effectively move about in only one of these. Usually, there is enough variation in each type of environment, for example, calm versus stormy air, to render robots effective in just a subset of the types of environment listed above. It would be nice if we could build a robot that could move about just fine in all of these environments, and all of even one of these types of environments that we've outlined here would be great. However, that's very challenging, right? Animals haven't even been very successful at doing more than 1 or 2 of these at a time. So, examples of methods of locomotion include rolling, walking, jumping, stick slipping, which the idea with stick slipping is that if you have something move in an oscillatory way and you want, say, the pen to move in this direction, then you move in that direction a little bit slower, then you jerk back, and then you move, and then you jerk back, and then you move, and then slowly the pen moves forward. That's stick-slip motion. It's just one type, but I thought it was a fun one to discuss. Slithering, undulating. So that can be a sort of repetitive motion in some medium that you can push off of. Jet propelling, where you throw something out of the back of your robot. Sometimes it's fuel or some other air or fluid. Rotary propelling, so like a helicopter or an engine that drives a propeller. Flapping, like this. Gliding, okay, gliding would be using a sort of aerodynamic shape to sort of fall slowly, or as Buzz Lightyear put it, I think, falling with style. Soaring, which is something that we see in birds, for instance, where they will catch updrafts, and other types of creatures do this too in currents, for instance, in the oceans, where they'll use the surrounding environment to move about, what the surrounding environment's doing. Swimming, ballooning is another one as well. So these are all ways of moving around, methods of locomotion. Examples of robotic locomotion devices include wheels, the ubiquitous wheels, tracks, so think of like a tank or a caterpillar, meaning the machinery caterpillar, not the insect. Legs, arms, tails, rockets, propellers, sails, wings, fins, magnets, and cilia. Okay, cilia are the small sort of outcroppings of cells that wave about. Okay, so they're very small. They're used in, for instance, microfluidics for doing mixing, and there are some researchers, for instance, the University of Washington, that are working on using cilia to actually move a robot around. Locomotion is one of the fields of robotics that relies most heavily on biomimicry. Remember, that's mimicking animals. Animals have developed incredible and unique methods of locomotion, and the study of them has been a goldmine for robotics. It is worth considering here a threefold distinction made among actuators, effectors, and behaviors. Consider the aerial robot of figure 1.2 that flies by flapping its wings. Okay, so we have an aerial robot, frequently called a drone, or an unmanned aerial vehicle, a UAV. Okay, and this aerial robot is exhibiting the behavior of flying or flapping its wings. We differentiate among these things. So the flying or flapping behavior is sort of the result of two things that are going on sort of behind the scenes, if you will. The first is that we have an actuator, which is a motor in this case. So motors are one type of actuator, a very common type of actuator for a robot. The other distinction we make from the actuator is the effector. Okay, so the effector is the thing that actually interacts with the environment. So usually the effector is not also an actuator. It doesn't also sort of transfer that energy from, whatever it is, a battery frequently is the energy storage element on a robot, into the surrounding environment. So that transfer of energy usually occurs from the actuator, so through the actuator into the effector, which actually interacts with the environment. So the wings in this case. And so if we have the actuator flap the wings, we will see flying behavior emerge, right? Well, hopefully, if it's working, right? So This brings us to another important consideration in mobile robotics: navigation. This involves several of the qualities of a robot we'll consider in the text, but the mechanical facet of navigation is that of describing spatial location and orientation through time, and the forces there involved. We'll return to these considerations, which constitute the study of mechanics, at the end of this lecture. Again, mechanics, mechanical engineers, that's what we're all about here, right? Okay, moving on from locomotion to manipulation. Manipulation robots move around objects in the world. So they move the objects themselves around. Although it is not a requirement, most of the time they are themselves stationary, attached to something relatively fixed. This helps the robot move things by providing somewhere to stand, as it were. Manipulation robots also use actuators, effectors, and exhibit behaviors. The behavior of grasping is especially important for manipulation robots. By grasping an object, typically an effector called a gripper, it becomes rigidly attached to the effector. So if this is my robot grasper or gripper, and this is the object, once I have grasped it, once I've gripped the object, now it is attached rigidly, more or less, to my arm, to my robot arm, to my gripper. So that's nice. Now we can move around the object as we move around the arm and the gripper. It's hard to think a manipulation robot without an arm, a fact that jives with the survey of primates, animals known for cognition and an ability to manipulate tools. Of course, robots, if they're going to be intelligent and able to use tools to do things in the world, they're going to need to have some similar characteristics to operate, at least on Earth, to those animals, or that's at least one way to think about how to design things that do intelligent, manipulative tasks. This does not mean there aren't superior ways to using an arm and a hand and a gripper, that type of thing, but that arms are, dare I say, close at hand to a human designer. So we're ready not only with dad jokes, but also to use what we already know cognitively works in the world to manipulate objects and to move about in the world. Let's consider another way of understanding the advantages of an arm for a manipulation robot. The concept of degrees of freedom, or DOF, will help us here. Later, we will consider the world's three-dimensional space in greater detail. But for now, consider that an object in this space can potentially translate in three independent directions and rotate about three independent axes. Speaking somewhat simplified mode, we can say that a robot has a degree of freedom for each independent axis along which it can translate, so move in a translational manner, and about which it can rotate. Okay? Returning then to the arm, we see it has several joints that allow it to increase its degree of freedom. The jointedness of arms are the key to their excellence in manipulation. The more degrees of freedom it has to move, the more complex can its movements be. There are systematic ways of classifying joints and arms in terms of degrees of freedom, which we will consider later. For now, we simply want to understand the motivation of going into a detailed analysis. Okay, so I've noticed that people don't really like doing detailed analyses unless they have some motivation for it. The goal of analyzing joints and arms is to describe an arm's position and orientation, how to make it move from one position and orientation to another, and understanding the forces there involved. As in the conclusion of the preceding section on locomotion, we have found ourselves concerned with matters of mechanics. Okay, So that's where we are. We're talking about mechanics, and since we're mechanical engineers, this is our forte, right? This is what we like. All right. Mechanics is the study of the motion of matter and the causes and effects thereof. We call the cause of motion force, which is typically understood to potentially produce the motion of matter. As mechanical engineers, we are interested in several subfields of mechanics, including fluid mechanics, we take a whole course on that, solid mechanics, which includes mechanics of bodies that are flexible, okay, and rigid body mechanics. So that's mechanics of bodies that are approximated at least as being completely rigid and inflexible. Most of these specialized fields of study are focused on the motion and forces that cause it in specific types of material. So in fluids, in solids that are very rigid, or in solids that are more flexible. It is convenient to differentiate between two primary considerations in mechanics: kinematics, which mathematically describes the motion of matter, emphasis here is on the motion of matter, and kinetics, which mathematically describes the forces that cause motion. Okay? A famously challenging aspect of mechanics and robotics is called inverse kinematics, which is the study of how to back out the positions and orientations of a robot's parts that yield some desirable overall configuration. The quintessential example here is a robot arm. If we want the gripper to be located in a certain position and orientation, where should each of the individual joints be? Okay, so there are frequently multiple solutions for a given gripper configuration. This problem is exacerbated by the fact that frequently there are additional constraints on variables. For instance, we can't have the robot arm go through the floor or the wall, for instance, yielding a system of equations and inequalities. So solving a system of equations can be challenging. Adding in constraints via inequalities makes that even more challenging. Even worse, these equations are usually nonlinear, okay? Trigonometry is coming in, we've got cosines of theta, that type of thing. Good analytic and numerical techniques for inverse kinematics have been developed, and we'll consider some later in the text. All right, so this has been the mechanicality of robotics, and as you can see, there are a lot of things that come into robotics that are to do with the spatial orientation, position of objects, the robot and its environment. Navigation, getting around in an environment involves that aspect as well. Mechanics have come in, the dynamics of how a robot is going to change its position and orientation in time, its interaction with its environment. These things are all mechanical topics, and so the mechanicality of robots is to me paramount, and I think implies that robotics is a topic of study that mechanical engineers should find to be right in our wheelhouse or the sweet spot for us. So lots of fun stuff here. We can apply our learning in kinematics, kinetics, dynamics, dynamic systems, differential equations, which always arise when we have dynamic systems. Lots of fun stuff to do here for mechanical engineers. All right, that's all I've got for you for this lecture. Bye-bye.